Hello and good morning to our eDiscovery IQ audience. This is the eDiscovery Intelligence podcast series designed with useful and practical nuggets to help you manage your every case eDiscovery needs. Carla Bauer is founder and senior consultant of eDiscovery IQ. My name is Melissa Rogozinski and I'll be your host today. Today is Wednesday, February 22nd, 2017, and we're going to talk about ways to reduce and recover your eDiscovery expenses. You can read Carla's article, Budgeting, Part 3, eDiscovery Cost Reduction and Recovery, on our blog page at www.ediscoveryiq.com. Good morning, Carla.
Good morning.
Carla, the first thing you address in your article is to learn about eDiscovery. How can learning about eDiscovery help us to reduce costs?
Well, I think the more knowledgeable you are, the easier it is to get through the process and to know what steps need to be taken and to know why we're taking those steps. I don't believe that attorneys need to know everything about it, but you need to have a good basis for what you're doing so that you can understand what email families are and emails and attachments and why it's important to keep those together and to, what kind of reviewers you're going to need, what kind of questions the clients are going to ask and what kind of, what difficulties can arise so that you can avoid those. And I think the attorneys that I've worked with that have done at least a reasonable job of getting educated and becoming more knowledgeable really are significantly outperform those who don't want to learn anything about it and say just have someone else handle that.
You mentioned a couple of things that remind me about the California State Bar opinion. I think it was last year, and we've included a link to it in your blog article on our website, that the California State Bar issued an opinion making learning about eDiscovery an ethical obligation. And they basically tell attorneys that they need to either learn about eDiscovery, hire someone who knows about eDiscovery, or refuse the client. Other states are starting to follow suit. Florida State Bar last year issued a new order that mandating 3 additional hours of CLE credit, but those 3 hours must be in technology. And I actually just had a conversation last week with the Ohio State Bar, and I know that they are discussing changes to their state rules to make learning about eDiscovery and technology an ethical obligation. We're already aware of the American Bar Association making learning about technology ethical, and it's just, with the federal rules having been amended twice, several states not only amending their rules, but now making learning about technology and eDiscovery an ethical obligation. Carla, we're 10 or 11 years into these changes. Why do you think that so many legal professionals have resisted learning about eDiscovery?
I think it adds another layer of complexity to the case. Sometimes it's not one that attorneys particularly want to deal with. They want to deal with the facts of the case and the merits of the case and not necessarily wading through volumes and volumes of electronic data. It wasn't something that when this first round of attorneys came into practice, it wasn't something they anticipated having to think about or deal with. Now, newer attorneys and younger attorneys as they graduate and join firms, yeah, it's definitely something they are more aware of. But I think the first round of people that have had to face these challenges and deal with these problems didn't anticipate that they were going to have to know what email families were and understand email threading and why it's important to do that. And so I think that's provided a lot of resistance. Just it's not someplace where they feel comfortable because most of the attorneys are the baby boomers and they didn't grow up with computers. They kind of came around later in their lives. And so while they might have embraced it to a certain degree, it's still hard to have that full comprehension of it. And even the ones that have embraced it, I still know attorneys who refuse to use Outlook calendars and different things to keep themselves because they have they have a calendar and they write it down and that works for them, which is great. But if you want your secretary to schedule your appointments, it's a little bit easier if you use the Outlook calendar than her having to go and make copies of your calendar and then update it and those kinds of things. So I think there's been that resistance. It was this unanticipated obstacle that came to be, and it was a game changer from paper. It was just a totally new area, and I still remember some of the first cases that I worked on, and it was when Zublake was ongoing, and there was questions over just about everything to do with it, whether printing it out was good enough and why you could and you couldn't. And now I look at it and go, who would be crazy enough to even try to print all this stuff out? But some people still would like to do that.
You know, you brought up a good point, and it really made me think. You know, I think that there are a couple of main reasons. I did a program a few years ago with the ESI Roundtable, and we talked about what the fear of technology was, the fear of learning, and it really was rooted in the perceived cost of e-discovery, and just that technology has its own vocabulary, it's its own word, and it's not what we were taught in law school or as paralegals. You know, I've been in the industry for 23 years, and I mean, it didn't even exist. What you and I are doing didn't even exist 23 years ago when I started in this field.
Well, and I think that's always part of the issue and the problem. It is new, and the vocabulary. I think that's one of the biggest. And I even work with CIOs and information technology professionals, but they're not dealing with e-discovery in the way that we are. So I use terminology and they'll say, email threading, what are you talking about? Why would you do that? So there's it's its own little vernacular, that it's its own jargon, and that when you become someone who works in it every day, you get so accustomed to that jargon that you don't even realize that other people have no clue what you're talking about. So a lot of times I have to slow down and, answer those questions. What's a PST file? What's this? What's email threading? What does near duplicate mean? What's the NIST list? All of those terms that get thrown around, and a lot of attorneys don't know what they're talking about, or they smile and nod sometimes, or they will stop and ask questions. But that's where I say, get educated, stop and ask the questions. And I think you should almost, in my opinion, I think most of the time, most firms are going to need an expert to help them, because there are so many decision points that are come up throughout the case that are going to really determine what those costs will be. And if you don't have someone involved that truly, thoroughly, completely understands e-discovery and the nature of it, you're going to take on some risks that you don't even realize you're taking.
I think that's really important. I think, what I've seen in the last 10 years that I've been in e-discovery is a real push for technology, a push for lawyers to learn, and this resistance for the reasons we've discussed. But if the attorneys would really think about it as they have a firm administrator, they have a secretary, they have a paralegal, even as a small firm. And then you have a team of people that work with you on all of your cases. So why wouldn't you have a team member that specializes in e-discovery, whether it's someone in-house or you outsource that and hire a consultant? It just makes sense. The lawyer's responsible for that because their license depends on it. It's now required, like we said, in CLE and technical requirements, ethical obligations. But adding that person who specializes in e-discovery to your team, whether it's someone that you get in-house that trains and specializes in e-discovery, or you hire a consultant. So that kind of moves us into the next question. How can lawyers, not only once they get themselves educated, but what kind of topics are lawyers' clients looking to learn about? What do their clients need to know?
Well, I think the clients really need to know, they need to understand some of the terminology too. So one of the things that I provide for my law firm clients is a booklet that they can provide for their clients that goes through and explains, one, the process of eDiscovery. So what are these steps that they're going to be getting invoiced for all these things that are going to show up, and most of the time nobody understands what any of that was for. And so I created a guide for the clients and the attorneys to be able to go over with them, so that when they start seeing these charges on their invoice, once they've anticipated that they're going to be billed for them, and they have an idea of what that's going to be, and they know that this is going to be, it's usually a front-loaded billing. So your first invoice, it might be through the roof and it might give you a heart attack, but that should be the bulk of your cost, the collection, the processing, and then after that it kind of slows down and you get heavy. Your billing's going to shift to be reviewer and production costs. So when you inform them of that, instead of waiting, a lot of times they'll get approval for it, but the approval is it's going to cost $30,000. They don't usually explain that $30,000 is probably going to be that first invoice you get from us on this, and so the client kind of gets shaken, especially when it's a smaller company that doesn't anticipate it. When it's a larger company that maybe they have someone in their eDiscovery department, it's still good to have a conversation with that person or people, that department, and understand their particular process, how they are accustomed to things being done, because a lot of times you'll find that not everybody does things the same way, and they may do it one way and you're anticipating it to be a little different. Like email collections, they might not run search terms and just dump out a bunch of PSTs to you and expect the law firm to take over from there. Some of them will actually do processing and give you load files, so it just kind of depends on that. So I think it's really good to educate them and have the conversation about that. This is our process, this is what we typically do, and make sure that those two things go together well and everybody's on the same page.
So educating clients about terminology, educating clients on the process, which we refer to as the EDRM model, identification, preservation, collection, processing, review, and also explaining to the client who the team members are, who each person's function is, and helping them to understand what the invoice is going to look like, what the budget for the case needs to be to manage this, but also reminding clients this is still just a part of discovery, which has been a process in litigation since the dawn of time. It's simply a new format, which does have its own set of complexities. So how can we educate lawyers and their clients about eDiscovery?
I think the best way is to really reach out. What I'm trying to do, reach out now and grab their attention and give them the information that they need in a format that's easily digestible, that makes sense, that is something that they can, absorb. I think a lot of times things get presented in CLEs or that come up, and it's not always in a cohesive format. It's bits and pieces here and there, and then attorneys are kind of left to go out and put that together. And a lot of times I get questions about, everybody keeps talking about this. What is the PSTs? What are PSTs? And it's just breaking that down for them so that they understand it's an email collection and here are the issues. And I think trying to get, a lot of times, especially with the small to medium-sized law firms, people are very accustomed to this do-it-yourself type mentality, because that's kind of, you got to do that to get by. But I think doing that in eDiscovery most of the time is going to lead to risk that you're not even aware of, that can be a big deal, game-changing kind of risk. So educating them, getting out to them, and having a resource available that's easily at their disposal that they can contact and say, okay, I have this question, can you help me? And how much will that cost? And then helping them understand those costs and how they're associated with their job. A lot of times it's not anymore to have someone who's a specialized person do the task that a paralegal's doing. It's actually going to cost less because they're going to get it done in less amount of time and get it back to them quicker than trying to do it yourself using a series of tools that you're kind of shoestrings and rubber banding together to get documents produced and printed out properly.
Well, and if you don't mind, I'm going to add to kind of some how can lawyers educate their clients, because that's what I've been doing for the last several years and what you and I are doing together. Just very simply understanding the topics that your clients want to and need to learn about. You can easily break those down into bite sizes, whether it's writing short, bullet pointed blog articles, putting those out on your website, your e-newsletter, your social media, LinkedIn and Twitter profiles, wherever your clients are getting information. But the key is putting it in bite sizes and bullet points so it's easy and quick to read. And then, of course, more advanced things like what you and I are doing, the video and the audio podcasting, because if people don't have time to read, they can listen, they can watch during their lunch hour. But then certainly the CLEs doing that in-person small group discussion where most professionals, whether they're lawyers or accountants or medical professionals, what have you, they need continuing education credits. And so it's very easy to put together a short program where people can get professional credits, but also have a discussion with their colleagues. And what I've seen in my career is that pulling them together in that small group setting in person and engaging dialogue through a continuing education program actually helps them to feel more comfortable, to realize, first of all, they're not in that boat alone, that there's a lot of other people that don't understand it at the same level. But then also being in a room of educators who do understand, but doing it in a way that's not a sales pitch. People don't need or want a sales pitch. They need education. And if you simply give them education in bite sizes, then they will cling to you. They will follow you. They will seek you out, whether it's during or after the program or, in the weeks afterward, when they can reach out to you privately and have an intimate conversation. And those are the ways that I've seen that lawyers and people like you and I can really educate people, understanding the topics, delivering it in a variety of formats, but in small bite sizes, and don't sales pitch it. What do you think about that?
I think that's definitely the best way to reach that target audience and to get people to where there's, and I've seen this grow and increase. And it's definitely more prevalent now than it used to be when I first was started in the industry. I really see, attorneys that are using some of the terminology and they're getting some of these concepts and they're making a lot of progress. I think there's still a lot that needs to be done. And I am seeing a lot more decisions that are made that are more beneficial to everybody involved. And I don't want to say cooperation in what most of the time you think of the word, but a little more cooperation between attorneys. They're actually setting up these meetings, having the calls, and getting professionals on the phone. I think there's this, to some degree, it feels like they should be able to know everything about everything as the attorney. They should be able to have the conversation between each other about these technical details. As the technical person, when you're on a 26F conference call and you're talking to counsel, you quickly start to realize they kind of know the terminology, they know a little bit about what they're talking about, but they'll get off on a topic that really isn't something they have enough knowledge to be speaking about. And if there's two technical people on the call, then you're able to jump in and say, okay, what you guys are arguing about, this, it's like, we don't need to talk about that. This is okay. This is industry standard, and move things along. Whereas years ago, when I worked on similar cases to that would have been months of motion practice going back and forth, and the judge getting frustrated and everybody getting frustrated. And a lot of times the attorneys were arguing a point that really wasn't, it didn't really make a whole lot of sense, and it wasn't going to make a big difference in the long term, but they kind of got off on an argument instead of that cooperation. So I have seen a lot more cooperation from attorneys working together, and I have seen a lot more use of experts, and even to the extent of pulling in review experts that can show them how to do the document review and how to conquer what might seem to a small firm as an insurmountable amount of data. But once they see, oh, we can break it down like this, well, that's much easier. And I just witnessed that happening recently. And so the firm has learned so much from going through this process with an expert rather than trying to just dig in their heels and do it themselves. Brute force.
So we were going to talk about how we're talking about reducing costs to begin with, then we're going to jump into recovering costs. But let me see if I can encapsulate this. So learning about eDiscovery, both for lawyers and in educating their clients, if we could say that has 3 major impacts on the budgeting process. You're talking about cooperation a lot. I think, first of all, educating lawyers and their clients and understanding the terminology is going to help them in understanding what to ask for and where to find it. Understanding the process is going to help them understand what steps they need to take in the order they need to take them, and which steps are going to cost how much and how that impacts the budgeting process. You addressed that earlier. And I think the third thing, which is what you just mentioned, is in understanding the terminology and understanding the process, lawyers and their clients can then work towards better cooperation with other parties in the case. And those are probably the 3 main points that we've discussed on how they can reduce the cost of eDiscovery to begin with. Would you agree?
Yes, and I think those are absolutely what then facilitates the ability to recover costs, because now that you've got things under control, clients are more willing to spend the reasonable amount of money that it's going to cost to do this, because now they're starting to understand why it's being done and what the benefits to them are. I think years ago, and I know when I was doing this 5 or 10 years ago and I worked for a law firm and it was a case that a vendor said, no, you go ahead, you guys just focus on the law. We'll take all this technical stuff and do it for you. And then when things got messy, they're like, well, you didn't know. Well, you can't do it for them. You have to sort of show, at least they need to understand how to fish, even if they're not fishing for themselves, which I mostly don't recommend doing your own fishing totally on your own, but you can learn to fish and you can help with the fish and still keep someone that's an expert there. But those are the concepts and the ideas that lead to the ability to really recover those costs, pass them through to your clients that now understand what's going on, and they're not irate. They understand what industry averages are because you're educating them about that. And I think that's where the failure, and that's where a lot of law firms have lost lots of money over the years, is that inability to communicate that to the clients, and the clients having sticker shock. Simply put, I know so many times that I've had to pass bills through, and I know these people are going to just be beside themselves when they get it, and they had no idea that it was going to cost this much, but the attorneys didn't either, because it's broken down in these nice little numbers: $20 a gig, $30 for this. It's like, oh, that's not so bad until it's $5 million. And then it's kind of, oh, well, $20 a gig isn't that great of a price, is it? So I think once you start to do that, it makes the cost recovery become just a much easier process because everyone's on the same page.
So right before we wrap up, Carla, I want to remind our audience that you do have some very specific tailored methods on helping attorneys to recover their costs and explain it to clients, but they should reach out directly to you for that. This is the third and final part in our budgeting series. So part one was the cost benefits of managing ESI. Part two was budgeting for eDiscovery, and Angela Mashuli joined us for that. And now today we're talking about how to take those things to reduce and recover costs of eDiscovery to make it more manageable. So with that in mind, do you have any closing comments for the budgeting in eDiscovery series?
Well, I think budgeting has been something that's long been overlooked in the legal field because it's more difficult. We're not making widgets that we can predict how many widgets are going to be purchased. We're billing for time, and we're billing for a lot of very intricate and involved processes, and it's very difficult to estimate. I always had that question of how long will it take for you to do this, and the answer is I don't really know. It could be it could be all night. It could be it's not going to take that long. Now, I would tell you nowadays I have a much better idea of how long something's going to take because I keep those metrics and I track that. And that's if I'm doing it. If I am sending it out to someone else, maybe I don't know because I don't know what their workload is. But I think the budgeting is a key factor that has been overlooked, that it needs to be focused on. And when I've talked to companies, even Fortune 500 companies, on a case and asked, well, what do you have budgeted for this? And they say, well, we don't know. How much should we have budgeted? And so that's a starting point because, well, let's look at how many custodians you have, how much data we should have, and then we can start to figure out what this should look like. Previously, they were going to the vendor and saying, I have this, how much will it cost for you to do this? And having no point of reference on their own accord to know what they were looking for and what they thought they should be spending on that. And they thought they should be spending nothing, but that's not the option. So I think once we get that down, it feeds into all the other elements of eDiscovery and making the projects go successfully and really getting it down so that it's a process and a procedure and we're following steps that are predictable.
So you and I together combined have been in this industry about as long as we both have been alive on the face of the planet. We won't give that number out. But you hit on something that I know is true for both of us. I've worked with you long enough to know this too, on both sides, that understanding the terminology, understanding the process, understanding the nature of the beast has helped both of us in our own consulting expertise to understand how much time it's going to take for you to do what you do with consulting and project management, and for me to do what I do with consulting and in marketing and business development. And I think I've seen with both of us very specific examples how we have really done a fine job of pinpointing exactly how much time it's going to take for a project, how much time it's going to take for each task. And I think that's really key, that if you understand all of these things we've already talked about, that you can determine how much time with pretty good accuracy. And time is huge when it comes to cost. So understanding the pieces of the puzzle, but how long is it going to take to put that puzzle together? But I think the key here is that attorneys and their clients need to work with people who have enough experience in their field to be able to predict those factors. because that has everything to do with how much something is going to cost and being able to control that. And if something gets a little off the rails, you've already done such a good job predicting things that getting off the rails a little bit or getting a surprise, everybody knows to build those factors in, but it's a whole lot more manageable and nothing's going to get bent out of shape by that. And you can quickly pull back the reins and get control back over things. Any comments before we wrap this up?
I would just say it is exciting to be a part of this industry and to see this growth actually happening, and a lot of the concepts and ideas and things that I've been working on for years, that I've had conversations with colleagues. I remember working on a case and the attorney came in and said, we need to have this all done in 2 weeks. And it was, a huge amount of data. There was no way we could do that in 2 weeks. Those kind of scenarios, really, I haven't had one in, knock on wood, very long. It's been a long time since I've had one of the situations come up where we have this unreasonable deadline and a judge that doesn't understand, an opposing counsel who really doesn't understand either, but they just want their stuff and they want it now. And I think we're getting away from that more and more, and people are starting to embrace the process and procedure, and to reach out and to say, how long will it take to do this, because I need to file for an extension of time, and doing that in advance instead of waiting till that day and go, oh, we're not done, we need to file for a motion to extend time. Like, let's go ahead and do that now so that we know we have it, because we need it. We're not going to be able to be finished. And that's where the cooperation comes in as well, is to work with each other to say, okay, I can give you this amount of time to get that review done, and by a standard calculation of these factors, you should be able to have that completed. These are industry standard and average, and we'll even add in a little padding time. And that was one of the things we just did on a recent case. So we were basing it off of real life industry averages. And some of those calculators we will be releasing soon, that people will be able to log in and use and put in, how many documents do you have? How many gigs do you have? You need to figure out how many documents you think you're going to have. We're going to have some of those available, and that's some very useful things for a lot of people in the industry, just to be able to calculate those very basic beginning facts to set the budget.
Well, I look forward to helping you get those things out and release those things. So understanding terminology, understanding process, understanding your team, facilitating cooperation, and all of those filtering into understanding how to budget for your time, those are the critical points in helping to reduce and recover e-discovery costs. Well, folks, that wraps up our time for today. Once again, I'd like to thank Carla Bauer, our fearless leader, for joining us today and sharing her thoughts on reducing and recovering costs in e-discovery. You can learn more about eDiscovery IQ at www.ediscoveryiq.com. Follow us on Twitter at eDiscoveryIQ, or connect with Carla on LinkedIn. Please subscribe to our iTunes and YouTube channels to keep up with our bi-weekly podcast and video podcasts. You can reach our team by emailing Carla directly at carla.bauer@ediscoveryiq.com, or you can call her at 513-409-3947. Join us next time when we dive into our next series on vendor selection and management. That's all for today's episode of eDiscovery Intelligence. Thank you.